So we're rolling into another episode of the podcast, and my guest today is Jeff Eckart, and he's the CEO of Never the Same, and it's an organization in the U.S. And I will let him tell you more about that as we get going. But welcome, Jeff.
Good to see you, Mike, and good to hear your voice.
Good to see you too. And it's been probably a couple of years, I think, since we chatted. And so my first memory of you, Jeff, would be like I did a camp way back in like the late 90s in Ohio, I think it was. I remember it was like on a college campus, and you were the worship leader, and I was the speaker, and that was the first time that I remember meeting you. And then I've kind of just kind of kept track of your story along the way, I guess. And we run into each other every once in a while. And we also share the blessing of having a lot of daughters. I think like you have three, right? You have three. I have four, and so we're those dads that had a house full of women growing up. So, and a lot of people. When a lot of people when I told them I had four daughters, they would always say things like, "I'll pray for you." But I don't know about you, but it's just been nothing but a blessing for me. So
absolutely, and I've got two of them that are getting married here within 6 months. I just had one a few months ago, 3 months ago. I'm right in the middle, and then I got one 3 months from now. So yeah, it is a blessing. It's just figuring out how to pay for these weddings.
Yeah, our motto was make it look expensive, but it's actually cheap. That was kind of our MO. So we did a lot of begging and borrowing from some wealthier people that we knew, for sure. So why don't you give us a little bit of just kind of your background, your spiritual bio, before we get into what you're doing now?
Yeah, I was raised by parents that were believers. My dad was bivocational. He was a high school teacher at a public school, and he was also a pastor of a small local church in Indiana, where I grew up in Indianapolis. And so I had I would say three formative moments growing up in my spiritual life. The first one was the Billy Graham event when I was 9 years old. And I went forward in this big stadium event in Indianapolis. And that's where I really consider my initial decision to follow Christ. But then it didn't really impact a lot of my life. I was young, but it was significant. But when I was 14, that's when I really got serious about my faith, and my life really changed. And then when I was, I think 18 is when I really begrudgingly received and felt this assignment to serve in vocational ministry. And so for the last about 30 years, I've done that, but it's been really primarily with Next Generation Ministries and with students.
Right. So you were a youth pastor for a while, am I right? Or
about 20 years, and then
wow.
Yeah, a long time.
It is in youth pastor years. That's like 80 years, right?
I know. It's dog years. And then the last 11, I started a national youth ministry called Never the Same. And if anyone listening, if you're interested, our website is neverthesame.org. And we do several things. We do events around the country in the United States. We have a prayer initiative to unite and equip students to lead their own prayer groups on their school campus. We use an app to do that. Something just fell on my desk. Sorry.
That's all right.
We have
I thought it was a gunshot. It's like, oh no.
I know.
America, right? So the Canadian stereotype of America.
That's right. We have several initiatives, but getting students to pray at school, youth camps, different things, Bible engagement resources, but it's all focused on middle and high school students and equipping them and those that lead them to live out their faith and know the gospel.
Yeah. So how did the decision to kind of move out of the local church setting and kind of move into forming your own ministry, how did that play out for you? Because I know that's that's a kind of a risky, scary faith move at times.
Yeah, it was 2008. I was at a conference and I was just feeling a restlessness that, we can feel from time to time. And it was a kind of a dramatic day, but God just really began giving me these thoughts like, I'm going to move and shift you into this other thing. And so I had started NTS camp as a youth pastor, and that had been going about 8 years. We started it in 2000. And then I'd also, with a different friend, started Claim Your Campus, this prayer initiative. And so we had students in our youth group doing it in a few pockets around the country. And God just said, I want you to just sense in my heart, I want you to take those two things and put them together and start a ministry. So I started a few months later in 2009, and just on my own with no money, no plan. And it's been a miracle where we've really grown. We interact with tens of thousands of students through our ministry every week. We've got a lot of students around the country praying. Up until COVID, we were up to around 45, 50,000 students praying every week at their school through our app. So it's really been quite a ride. And to go from like one guy with a homemade desk and a laptop that some people bought for me, to where we are now, it's God's goodness and faithfulness, and we're still pressing forward.
Yeah. So in the early years, how did you raise funds? Did you just count on your like network of people that you had built up, or how did that work?
Yeah, that really was interesting because when I took 40 days off between leaving a role at a church to start this, and during that time, it was one of those moments where I remember exactly where I was. I could say exactly what I was doing, and I felt the Holy Spirit impress upon me, don't be a fundraiser, don't ask for money. And so at that point, I'd already quit my job, so I didn't have any.
Where's it going to come from? Right?
So I said, okay. And then we stumbled into one of the first ways that God really provided is we stumbled into doing an adventure race in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where I live, and called the Grand Rapids Mud Run. And it's a 5K muddy obstacle run. And we opened it up. We just prayed out of our minds, hoping that 1,000 people would show up the first year. And keep in mind, no social media marketing back then. We had no commercials, no billboards. It was all word of mouth. But we had 2,200 people show up.
Wow, that's amazing.
And it was incredible. And so what happened was God began to form in our nonprofit a business model nonprofit where we generate most of our own operational budget. And so we have about 10% that's donor even to this day. So we're, up in the.
So if someone wants to give, you're not going to refuse it.
No, and people
welcoming all gifts. Yeah.
Yeah, people do, but we've just learned a way to really create a business model for the ministry, which has been, for the most part, stable.
Yeah, and I think, man, I just think that's such a wise move, and I can see a lot of ministries heading in that direction. Just kind of given the current climate and situations that we're in, that seems to be maybe that idea came from the Lord, huh?
Yeah, absolutely, it did, because that has been the trend, but we really just stumbled into it, and I feel like it's God's providence.
So pre-COVID, tell us a little bit about the Never the Same camps. I know everybody had a pivot last summer, and I'm sure you guys did too. But what was happening up until that point, and then what did you do to kind of pivot to kind of where you're at now?
Yeah, 2020 was during the first 8 months or so, I'm looking at the calendar, but like from March when everything kind of really changed till early fall, like October, it was one of the toughest times of my life for sure. We had planned a large national event in the US, and we'd also had our camps going. So NTS camp happens around the country, and we've got several thousand students that go to those. And so we weren't able to hold any of those events.
Yeah, and I just want people, listeners who might not be aware of your ministry, like these are big camps, and they're spread out across the nation. It's a national movement, not just a localized kind of thing.
Yeah, and we're grateful. I mean, we've been one of the fastest growing camps in the country and in the U.S. and it's really been remarkable. And NTS camp is really built around not just the experience for students, but also making youth ministries better and more equipped and more encouraged. And so we do training with adult volunteers from churches. Adult volunteers come for free. And we've really seen youth ministries grow and flourish as a result of being a part of the network. And so we continue to reach churches, and it's really organic growth, word of mouth. We don't promote. You won't see us on anything really, but it's cool. And we, but it was hard. It was really devastating in many ways to not be able to get together. And obviously organizationally, it's really difficult because of the financial side, but just the connection, the spiritual moments that you have, what you see, it's a fruition of your work throughout the year when you're, in an office a lot of the times and you're not seeing people. So it was a difficult time, but we did some interactive online stuff where churches could do their own event at home, and many churches did that too.
Yeah, and there really is, no matter how good technology is, there just really is nothing the same as being in a room when the Holy Spirit falls, and there's just such a spiritual energy, and there's something dynamic that happens there that can't happen at home or over Zoom or so I'm glad we're kind of coming out of this now, but I've kind of maintained throughout this that I think church is an essential service. I think getting together is I don't think that's a peripheral side thing. So
agreed.
So as you were kind of wrestling through that, and I think all of us were I know like my whole year was disrupted as well, and I found myself being guests on a lot of podcasts and speaking, filming videos and sending them off to churches and all of these things that I'd never expected to really do. But so what after that initial thing, like where was the Lord leading you kind of through that once you got over the initial shock?
Yeah, and it was so we had planned on doing this large, like scale 100,000 student scale event.
That's a lot of students.
A lot of students, and it's a really long. In fact, right when I started the ministry back in 2009, just a few months in early 2010. I felt like the Lord began to download on me a vision to do a big event. And the purpose of this event was to launch and accelerate student prayer movements at schools. And so we started working on this event actively in 2017. It was called Claim Your Campus 2020. So Claim Your Campus is this student prayer movement that we have. But we started working on it. We raised $1.5 million. And we got right down to the end. I mean, we were running and gunning for 2.5 years. I mean, traveling, I got the airline status tags to prove it. I'm all over the place, and then everything changed. And then what God began to settle upon me was, and this sounds really strange, and we were talking a little bit off show here about this, but God really called me to take a walk, and I walked from Indiana to Kansas last summer and did a prayer.
How long would that be? Like, how many miles is that?
I did 227 miles.
Okay, that's a long walk.
A long walk, and with all all my gear. I was self-supporting for a period of that time, just sleeping all like woods and under bleachers and all kind of crazy places. And God really, and you know, what was interesting is that was all during the time when the really the probably the peak of the unrest in the U.S. with the riots and everything else. And the walk that I took was called the Trail of Death. It was a Potawatomi forced removal of Native Americans from Indiana to Kansas in 1838. So from September 4th to November 4th, 1838, there were about 1,000, a little under 1,000 Native Americans forcibly removed from their homes in Indiana and moved to Kansas. And so I walked that, and there's a backstory to it. I have a personal connection with the geography of it. But what's interesting is that Trail of Death ends in Kansas, where we were going to do our event, Claim Your Campus 2020 event. And I lived for a few years where that Trail of Death starts, which is in northern Indiana. So I'd been feeling this, and I got some insight from a really good mentor and friend of mine. His name's Nigel Big Pond. He's an elder gentleman who's Native American, lives in Tulsa, and we're good friends. And so we've been talking for a couple of years, but I took this walk, and then on that journey, I cut myself off from the world during that, when all this craziness was happening and all this really talk about justice. And I just wanted to listen to the Lord and listen to what he was saying to me specifically during this heartbreak of losing this event. I mean, we spent over $1 million for an event that never happened.
Wow.
And it was devastating. And then I was thinking, is our ministry going to survive financially? And everything that I had put my hope into all changed. So I took this walk, and it really did change my life. So that's what I did last summer.
Yeah. And so can you explain the kind of the concept of a prayer walk for those who might not, it might be a new thought for them.
Yeah. Well, you know, yeah, that can mean a lot of different things. So first of all, it wasn't me talking and praying out loud the whole time.
Right.
What I did was I felt this call to do it. And so I walked, and I decided I'm going to cut myself off from the news and from social media and from the world. And all I'm going to do is listen to my surroundings spiritually and physically as I walked, and just walk with the Lord in the sense of just not having any distractions. So, you know, it's one of the things that's so powerful about events and camps and retreats is that you get away from your normal everyday routine. And you see that throughout the story of God's people in scripture. God gets them away. He's got to get us away sometimes.
Yeah.
And that's what he did for me. He got me away from everything. And so I walked on average of about 12 to 15 miles a day, 6 days a week. And I just thought about my relationship with God, and thought about what he wanted to say to me, and thought about where our world was. And I will tell you, Mike, that I wept every day on that trip. And God he really took me through a time of really deep brokenness that I can't even describe to people. But it took me a while, but when I got back, I realized that everything that happened in 2020 and all the loss was the greatest thing for me that's ever happened in my relationship with the Lord, probably apart from my initial moment of, you know, having him as Savior and Lord in my life. And so I'm grateful, but it took me a long time. It was a really low time. Even when I got back, my body was broken, and I went through a real low time.
Yeah. So what is the fruit? Like, what is the life change that has come out of that, Jeff? Like, what do you feel like has shifted in your paradigm of life and ministry?
Well, there's one specific thing that we ended up doing that was really, I haven't spoken much about this publicly, but when I got back, there ended up being an interesting development. So a few people from around the country, about 30 people, flew in from around the country and walked the final 5 miles with me at the end of June. And when we got there, we realized, one of the friends of mine realized that where the trail of death ends was also a real critical point in the abolition and anti-slavery movement. This town, this little bitty town, Osawatomie, Kansas, was like the convergence of the Native American issue and the African American issue, and they crossed over. So there was a man in our history named John Brown, who was an abolitionist, and he really, if I would say if there's one person that was responsible for really sparking the Civil War, it would be John Brown. And so anyway, a friend of mine pointed that out to me. I didn't know that, and really believed the Lord was moving. And so we ended up doing a national kind of secretive underground prayer movement in Kansas last summer on August 30th. And we promoted it only by word of mouth. We built a password protected website. We had people involved. Between all of us, we had probably at least hundreds of thousands, maybe even over 1 million people on all of our email and social media lists, but we did not promote it publicly. It was only by word of mouth. About 600 people came, and we prayed for justice. We prayed and repented for the sins of our past. And we took responsibility for all the wrongs that have happened. And I really believe out of that, it was a personal, but also a public change, I believe, for our country with the people involved. And it was a privilege to be involved in that. And we said no live streaming, no social media posts. So it's one of those things no one really knows about. But we did it on August 30th, and we spent 6 hours out in this field in Kansas praying and repenting. And so that changed me a lot for sure. And then God has given me a peace and serenity that I cannot describe. But out of all this unrest and all this anger and all this anxiety and everything that we're going through, where people are being crushed by, all the changes that we're going through in our culture, and both believers and non-believers, God has given me such a deep sense of serenity. That's the best way I can say it. But things don't rattle me anymore, really. I mean, when I hear something on the news or whatever, which again, one of the things that changed me is I just cut myself off pretty much from the news cycle, because I realized how much my spirit was being led by that rather than the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, I think every day, I don't know, we don't think about this consciously a lot, but at a certain point, I realized, like through last summer, that like every day I get up, I'm either feeding my fear or I'm feeding my faith.
Yes.
And whatever I feed is going to get bigger and stronger in my life.
Yes.
And so that idea of like cutting off all of those things and just listening to the Lord, I think that's definitely where the peace that passes understanding comes from, right? And so I can resonate with that thought, because I think a lot of people, in different ways, a lot of people wrestle with that, and they may have landed in different places, but everybody wrestled with who's going to be my leader here, like
right.
who am I listening to?
And that came to that point, really, Mike, of complete brokenness, where I feel like I probably fell very subtly, but I fell into that rhythm of working for God instead of with God, in terms of, I'm doing this big event, God, and you called me to do this, and you provided miraculously all this money and crazy open doors and all these signs and wonders, and then it all ends. And then God was like, are you in this for you, or are you in this for me? And that walk really broke me down to say, I need to be in this for him.
Oh, I know exactly what you're saying. I had a point, I was getting ready to speak at a church it was probably like in July, and we were all praying, for everything to get better and to go back to normal. And as I was preparing this message, God said to me, hey, if it never goes back to normal, will you still serve me? Like,
Yeah.
will you serve me if, because I was definitely before that living my best life now. I was like you, I was involved in a lot of events, and life was going pretty fast, and I was really enjoying it. But it's really easy in the middle of that for the focus to shift from what the Lord actually wants us to do to our own thing that we're doing for Him, right?
Right.
And so I get what you're saying there. A couple of things jumped out at me too, with your walk. I was a couple of years ago. I was with a group. We were staying in a village in Haiti, and we just kind of got dropped off there. That was our base for the week, and so we literally, there were a series of villages in the surrounding area, and so every day we would walk to a different village. And it really struck me during that time that Jesus walked. There's something about the pace of walking.
Yes.
And when you're zooming through life, or when you're flying through, you don't tend to notice the same things, and you don't have the same kind of ministry.
Yeah.
And so just that idea of walking kind of slowly through a scene, and taking it all in, and having your ears open for what the Spirit might say in that is, I think that's something that gets lost in our schedules and in our technology sometimes.
It really does. It's that's an excellent way of saying it too. I remember, I walked for the first portion on my own, then my family joined me, and then so my wife walked with me one day, and then each of my daughters one day. But what was interesting is when they were with me, they would they would see me off in the morning, and then I would walk, and then it would literally take them 15 minutes to drive to pick us up. And so I spent the whole day out in the heat, walking alone and broken. And I realized, like, in our world today, you get inside the bubble of a car or any kind of transportation, and you're floating through it, but you're disconnected from your entire environment. And the sights, the sounds, the smells, and like you said, I think most importantly, the pace. And I think going from 1,000,000 miles an hour for 2.5 years, and then going to 5 miles an hour over the period of 227 miles. It was like 420,907 steps or something like that. But that reminded me that we get going so fast, and it doesn't matter what time frame we live in. I remember a friend of mine telling me about a book of a man that wrote about the distractions of life and how hard it was to stay focused on the Lord. And this book was written in like the year 300.
Right.
So nothing's changed. It's just the distractions are different, but it's
Yeah,
the same.
you can find some really, really hilariously interesting descriptions of teenagers, from those time periods too. And you're like, yeah, people always say the same things, right? This next generation.
I know, that's right. That's right. You and I, we have to set them straight and be an advocate for these great young kids.
Right, right. Yeah. So what do you see kind of coming out of all this? Like, what do you see as the future for, in terms of maybe like what you're what you're doing personally, but also in the bigger picture of things, as far as the church, and particularly like young adults and teens in America.
Strangely enough, to a lot of people, they're shocked when I say this, but I'm the most optimistic I've ever been about the next generation. I'm the most excited. I realize I'm not naive to the challenges that we have, and I know they're great. But I think what COVID has done is it's exposed all of us our need for something greater. It's exposed the hole, the God-shaped hole in your heart, that old classic phrase. And for us, I personally, and I know I speak for our team here, we more than ever felt the urgency for this hour of ministry and the opportunity that we have. And I think what would be tragic is for Christians right now to say, that's it, the world's going to hell and we know it, and we're just going to huddle up until the Lord comes back. And when you look at, a lot of people are saying now, and I think it's probably a good thing because it's healthy to live this way, but a lot of people are thinking maybe Jesus is coming back anytime. And I think that's a good way to live. And I'm sure you'd remember, when we were younger back in the 70s and 80s, that was a pretty prominent
It was.
thought. It's like, hey, the Lord may come back. And
I think
but
it was 88 reasons why Jesus is coming back in 1988 or something.
88, we got
And then
that
89 reasons and, the follow-up.
And so I look at it and I go, okay, this is an opportunity of a lifetime to reach this generation that need to hear it. And so one of the things that we were already leaning towards, but now we're really more leaning into, couple specific things. One is we're leaning more into faith and reason. We have been for a while, but there's a lot of discussion, and again, this is an age-old discussion, but does science disprove faith? And we believe that there's so much great evidence, and this is the information age. So we're reaching students not only with relational and emotional channels, but also intellectual, cerebral channels. And so that's taking a form of more resources in writing, podcasts, video content, and also in our camp and our event settings. And then the other thing we're doing is we're reaching down to a lower age group. So our ministry and youth ministry, in general Western terms, is middle and high schoolers. We're expanding our ministry in the near future to elementary, because that's where a lot of defining moments are happening younger and younger. And we feel like a lot of times, I've said for a while, I think middle school age and ministry is the most important ministry in a local church, because that's the pivot point in our society, because that's when people are kind of in or out. And I think that's going to shift lower in the next few years, in the next 3 to 5 years in our culture that I see. And so I think that 1st through 4th grade is going to be really important.
Yeah. And, and a lot of places I've been in the world, like basically youth ministry means from, age 5 to 35. Like it's much,
Yeah.
it's much broad. We tend to put people in these little silos and separate them by age. And there's some benefits to that, but also some negatives as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as we kind of bring the plane down for a landing here, just kind of winding up, what do you see like in general? How do you see the church coming out of this? Like, what are some things we need to do differently, like in the broader context, as we seem to be at least with the vaccines and kind of moving into, we seem to be coming out of COVID and into a period of somewhat more normalcy. But I know there's a lot of, statistically, there's some people that aren't coming back to our churches, and there's been some massive changes in culture that we have to kind of wrestle through. So what's your view for, I'm going to be talking to somebody next week about Canada, but what's your view for like America kind of heading into this?
Well, I have a couple of specific thoughts. One is that I think in America, speaking as an American, I think we've gone, probably it was starting to happen right before COVID, but we've gone from what I call Cold War to open war. So before, I think in terms of being a believer, we were in a period of Cold War where there was a war happening, but it was kind of under the surface. And now I think it's open war. And I think sometimes when you use that language, a lot of believers go, all right, let's, rise up and get angry and get aggressive. And I'm not saying it in those terms. What I believe is, as believers, what I'm hoping is that, you said some people may never come back and fill our churches the way they used to, at least for a while. And I think that's probably an addition by subtraction thing. I think that churches will discover maybe who really is rooted in their faith. And I think as believers, we have to just understand that and I would say this to you, Mike, and I'm saying this to a lot of my ministry leader friends. I think being a peacetime ministry leader is way different than being a wartime ministry leader. And I think we're in a time of war, and I think we have to respond and interact and lead differently than we did before COVID. So I think that's one thing. I also believe that churches and ministries, particularly churches, they have to get away from providing content that consumers can consume. And what I mean by that is, I think we've built a lot of our ministries and churches on, come to this great thing and you can consume this great content. And I think that's been exposed. And I was feeling really strongly the last 8 or 10 years about that. And here's what I think needs to happen, in my opinion, is that churches need to understand that a worship experience is not providing content for people. It's creating an environment where they can meet with God. And when that happens, and that's what we've built our ministry, particularly NTS Camp, on. We've built it on this idea, not come to get this great content. Come here and you're going to meet with God. And when you meet with God, you will be changed. And if churches could do that, not that we shouldn't provide great content. Hear me here, but our focus should be on, this is a worship experience and it's about Him. It's not about you and what you get out of it. And here's how I say it in a simple form. If we go to a worship experience wanting to be filled, we'll leave empty. But if we go to a worship experience wanting to be empty, we'll leave filled. And I think that's what we've got to call people to.
Yeah. And, basically any meeting that does not lead to mission, I question what's really going on there. Yeah. And so worship, there's definitely a connection between worship and work and the world. Yes. True worship, if we're really, really in touch with the Spirit of God, it may start with us and it may do some inner work, but it will always lead to an outward kind of focus. And yeah. So the events that are just, some of the events that I've been to lately, they can kind of seem like worship for worship's sake. You feel like there's an element missing there. And so yeah, I think you're absolutely bang on with that. And I think I agree too. People were talking spiritual warfare when we use words like warfare, and so I think that there needs to be strong biblical voices spoken into the culture about all the standard things that have always been part of the gospel, like eternity, lifestyle, holiness, all of those things. But also, I feel really strongly that there needs to be biblical voices of justice. You talked a lot about justice earlier, and it's interesting you were on the Trail of Tears, because we did not plan this at all, but I am right in the middle of reading a 600-page book about the history of Native Americans, and it's really, really fascinating. And there's so much in our history that's right and so much that's wrong. Yes. And we need to come to terms with that, but we need to come to terms with it from a biblical perspective. And so I think social justice really grew out of the scriptures, and there have been areas of social justice that have been hijacked. And so I really appreciate what you do, Jeff, and I appreciate that you have a biblical voice, a biblical perspective when it comes to those issues as well.
Thank you. And likewise, Mike, I've always really admired you. And I remember meeting you, like you talked about at the beginning. I remember some of the specific things you taught about all these years. That was probably 25 years ago at least. And
Yeah.
you've got a great voice. I'm glad you're doing this podcast. I was excited when you got a hold of me that you're doing this, and um, you know, we do need to be. It's funny. Right before you said it, I was thinking the exact same word and you said it. But social justice has been hijacked. That's a biblical value, and we need to fight for justice, and we need to do it in the right ways and in the right tone and with the right spirit. And with God's spirit, there's a winsomeness to justice too, because justice is something that we're all born with to desire and to fight for. And as believers, this is an opportunity for us. And again, not in a political way, but in a spiritual sense, in a biblical sense, fight for justice.
Yeah, it's been great chatting with you and catching up.
Yeah,
And so are you able to just plow ahead this summer with some camps, or how's that looking for you?
we are. Yeah,
Yeah.
we're having a good portion of our camps. Some of the parts in the country are still closed down, but we're doing that. And I'll be finishing up a project where, and again, we didn't talk about this, but I'll be doing a documentary on this prayer walk that will be might end up on some major streaming channels. We'll be finishing that up, and that'll be released in the fall. So if you'll have me back,
Yeah, we can talk
yeah,
about that, post a link to it, the whole thing. So,
yeah.
well, hey, it's great talking to you, and God bless you and your ministry and all the stuff you've got going on this summer.
Thank you, sir. You too.
All right. We'll just end the recording there. Hey,
Yeah,
that was great. Like, we get into areas that I was not planning to get into, but I think it just really was really good.
yeah. That's been that walk is really did change me. I can't even hardly describe it, but yeah, the documentary. I'll send you a trailer. There's a trailer that we produced. So what happened? It's a crazy story, but um, I just decided about 6-7 weeks before that I was going to do this walk, and then I talked to Nijo Big Pond, my friend and mentor, and I said, what should I capture some of this? And he said, yes, I want you to tell the story about Native Americans and about, everything else. And so 3 days before I left, I met a mutual friend who's a filmmaker, and I raised some money, and he was with me for about 10 days. And he filmed just everything. And then I didn't know what we were going to do with it. We came back, and I was talking with a friend in August, and she said, one of my former students, and she said, hey, our family just bought the streaming channel, and we're looking for content if you know of anything. And I said, well, I just did this walk, and I don't know what we're going to do with it. And she got really interested. So they just funded it. It's like it's another 200,000, but we're doing a professional 4-part original music
Oh,
series.
wow. That's amazing.
We'll be finishing up filming of that beginning of June, and he's going to go into post production, and then
Right.
I think it'll be out by probably September.
I'll be on the lookout for that. That sounds really good.
And
Yeah.
I'll send you a link to it. The trailer he just nailed it. He did a really good job with it.
Right.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, hey man, have a great rest of the day, and thank you for doing this.
Hey, thanks for asking. So good to meet you, man. I missed you.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure at some point we'll be at a conference or something. We'll run into each other somewhere along the line.
I hope so.
Okay, man. Thanks.
See you.
See ya.